So now let us see the first process of sexual reproduction that happens in flowering plants. So the sexual reproduction in plants actually happens in the flower. Okay, so plants, they reproduce sexually by producing male gametes, that is pollen grains, and female gametes called as eggs. A flower consists of sepals, petals, stamens and carpels. Stamens and carpels, they are the reproductive parts of the flower, which actually they are involved in the sexual reproduction. Then sepals and petals, they are called as accessory holes as they do not take part directly in the reproduction process. Okay. Then after this, unisexual flowers, they have either stamen in them or they have either carpels in them. But bisexual flowers, they have both stamen and carpels in them, right? Then if I talk about stamen, stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. It consists of anther and filament. Okay, the anther, it consists of pollen grains which are haploid in nature. Then if I talk about carpels, carpels, they are the female reproductive part of a flower, and it consists of stigma, style and ovary. Right, ovary, it contains female gametes or female germ cells called as eggs or ovules. So you must have seen some fruits that have seeds. Now these seeds, if they are sown in the soil, they grow into a new plant, they grow into a new individual, right? Then this process of reproduction in plants is the process of formation of seeds. So you must not get confused with the reproduction process, that is growing into a new plant, right? तो reproduction का process जो होता है plants के अंदर, that is called as germination. That means if a new plant is formed from the certain seed is called as germination, right? So now whatever the flowering plants we see, they contain reproductive parts in flowers and in which the seeds are enclosed within the fruit. ऐसे flowering plant जिनकी seeds fruits के अंदर पाई जाती है, those plants are called as angiosperms. And let us understand the male and female reproductive part one by one. As you can see here in the flower, the male reproductive part contains of two parts, that is anther and filament. This anther and filament together form a male reproductive part that is called as stamen. Now let us zoom in the male reproductive part, that is stamen. The tube-like structure is called as filament and the bulky structure is called as anther. Let us zoom into the anther. What you can see? You can find the pollen grains that are present in yellow color. These pollen grains are present in the powdery form on the anther. This pollen consists of male sex cells or the male gametes. These anther produces pollen grains which is again stored in the anther. Now, there are more than one pollen grains present in the anther, right? And there are more than one stamens present in a single flower. Female reproductive part is a flask-shaped structure present in the center of the flower. Okay, so as we have seen, male and female reproductive part, this female reproductive part which is present in the center, it is responsible for making ovules and it stores ovules inside them. Now these ovules are called as the female reproductive parts called as sex cells or female gametes. Now let us understand how this reproduction takes place in the flower. Male sex gamete or male sex cells, they unite with the female sex gametes to form seeds, right? Now this whole process of reproduction, it consists of mainly two processes, that is pollination and fertilization. Let us talk about the pollination first. If the transfer of pollen grains from stigma to the carpel of the flower is called as pollination. Now this pollination happens in two ways. First is self-pollination. Okay, let us consider an example of a bee here. A bee, when it sits on the stamen of the flower, what happens? Few pollen grains are sticked to the legs of the bees, right? And as we have discussed, stamen is the sticky part. Okay, the stamen contains some sticky substance that makes bee attract the pollen grains, right? So after this, whenever bee shifts to the next flower, what happens? Whenever it sits on the carpel or the stamen of the next flower, it drops all the pollen grains considered together. Right. So after this, what happens? The pollination process takes place. Now this pollination, it is from one stamen to the next stigma of the same flower. This process is called as self-pollination. But if the transfer of pollen grain is from stigma of the one flower to the stamen of the another flower, it is called as cross-pollination. Now let us talk about the fertilization process. So when this pollen grain is